Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome everyone back to YouTube. And today we start with a question. Do we believe in God or do we just blame God? So, back when I was younger, when things were going good, I took the credit. I enjoyed getting a pat on the back. Well, when things went wrong, rather than accept the blame, I looked to heaven and blamed God. So as a child, I always blamed my siblings, right? Whenever something happened, my response was, it wasn't me. Then when I got older, somewhere along the line, I started blaming God. Even when God came into my life, I found out that from time to time, I was still blaming God. And I actually didn't even know it. It was God who showed me what I was doing through His Word. We go over to Mark chapter 4, verse 36, and I'm going to be reading 36 to 38. It says, Now when they, the disciples, had left the multitude, they took him, Jesus, along in the boat as he was. 37. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. 38. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Stopping right there. In Mark chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples are crossing over the sea and they get caught up in a storm. And it says Jesus is asleep. Then they wake him up saying, Do you not care? So let's back up a bit. It says the disciples are in a storm. They had to have seen the storm in the distance. They had to have had time before the storm and during the storm to wake up Jesus to ask Jesus for help. We know there are 12 disciples, 12 men in the same boat with Jesus. And the Bible says they wake up Jesus until they are perishing. So why would they wait? Do you think they waited around to die? No. More than likely, they tried to handle the situation on their own. So there's 12 men, and four of them are fishermen. So some of them have experience on the water. Some are knowledgeable about boats and sails. More than likely, they tried to band together, trusting in what they know, believing in their own strength. They are caught in a storm. They start doing everything they can, everything in their power, everything humanly possible, everything except one thing, asking Jesus for help. And when they finally turn to Jesus for help to wake him up, they actually blame him, possibly getting mad at him because they say, Do you not care? When I first read this, God helped me see something. First, God helped me see that the storm was not Jesus' fault. Second, the disciples had opportunity to ask Jesus for help. Then God helped me see something in myself. Like the disciples, from time to time, I also found myself blaming Jesus and God. If I was having a bad day, whether it was bad traffic, bad weather, then I think to myself, God, do you not care? God, where are you? And guess what? God had an answer. Over in Luke chapter 8, verse 24. And this is where it mentions the same situation where they're in a boat and they're caught in a storm. Verse 24 says, And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we are perishing. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. 25. But he said to them, where is your faith? So Jesus says, where is your faith? Remember, the disciples had plenty of time and opportunity to ask Jesus for help, but they tried everything else. They tried everything they trusted in until it had failed them. Then they realized they are going to die. And then they finally turned to Jesus. And when they finally turn to Jesus, they say, do you not care? So the point here is it's, it's not that Jesus didn't care, but that the disciples did not care to ask Jesus. So when Jesus says, where is your faith? It's pretty obvious where their faith was and where their faith was not. Their faith was everywhere else. Their faith was in everything else, in everyone else, but not in Jesus. Ironically, the disciples had Jesus with them. Jesus is in the same boat through the whole situation, from the beginning to what was nearly their end. And guess what? We do the same thing to this day. I mean, physically, we are not trying to cross open waters, but spiritually, we are struggling. We get caught up in situations that we cannot handle on our own. When I first read this, I was looking at the disciples. I was wondering why they waited to ask Jesus for help. I was thinking they had the solution with them the whole time. It was God who helped me see that we actually do the same thing. In any situation, we have plenty of time to ask Jesus for help. Before the storm comes, before the winds start picking up, before the boat starts to rock, before things get out of hand, we have opportunity to seek Jesus. Now, some people might say, but I don't know Jesus. Over in John chapter 14, verse 17, it says, the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. But you know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. Here it says, the Spirit of truth is with you. And in the same chapter, back in verse 6, Jesus says, I am the truth. So when Jesus says the Spirit of truth is with you, Jesus is saying that Jesus himself is with you. And Jesus is also saying that you do know him, that he dwells with you and is in you because you have heard of him. At some point in our life, you heard of Jesus, and the idea of Jesus stays with you. But it's up to you to wake him up. Back in Mark chapter 4, verse 38, it says, Jesus is asleep. It's not that Jesus is asleep, but that the disciples did not acknowledge Jesus. They didn't believe Jesus could do anything. Their faith, belief, and trust was not in Jesus, which prevented Jesus from waking up. Over in Matthew chapter 13, verse 58, it says, now he did not do many mighty works because of their unbelief. This verse lets us know that because of unbelief, a mighty work could not be done, which also explains why Jesus was asleep. It wasn't that Jesus wasn't there. Jesus was right there with them, but they did not believe in him. Looking back at the disciples, their faith was not in Jesus. Their faith was in each other. They looked to their own strength, they looked to their own experience, and they put Jesus last. They looked at Jesus as a last resort. Now, let's look at ourselves. Where is our faith? We put our faith and belief in everything else. We trust our experience and what we know. We put our faith in our strength and our possessions. But when something happens, we wonder, where's God? Doesn't doesn't God care? When it comes to blame, people get defensive. We get mad at each other, focusing on the problem and not the solution. We blame each other to make ourselves feel better, but it does not solve the problem. When Jesus was blamed, he didn't get defensive. Back in Mark chapter 4 and Luke chapter 8, it says Jesus calms the storm. Jesus doesn't say, it's not my fault. He doesn't start pointing fingers saying, you this or you that. Jesus gets up and saves their life. In our own personal life, there are things we are going through, problems that are trying to take our life, situations we can't handle. The more we struggle, it seems like the worse it gets. And Jesus is right there in the same boat, just waiting for you to wake him up. If we would just turn to Jesus, then we wouldn't have to battle the storm alone. Because for some of us, it does get to the point of death. For some people, it gets to the point where it's too late. And they had a chance to call on Jesus. And Jesus was right there the whole time. So remember, God and Jesus are there. But they are not there for us to blame. The next time we blame God, let's ask ourselves where our faith is. Because the Bible says God and Jesus are the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Meaning they are there to help you before the storm, during the storm, and after the storm. Thank you for watching.